Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. In the vast, sun-scorched landscapes of Western Australia, an unlikely war was declared in 1932. It wasn't against a foreign power or a rebel force. The enemy was a bird, a very large, flightless, and surprisingly resilient bird. This is the bizarre, true story of when the Australian military, armed with machine guns, went to war against 20,000 emus and lost. Prepare to witness one of history's most peculiar conflicts: the Great Emu War. The Great War was over, but its echoes resonated deeply in the hearts of the men who returned. For many Australian veterans, the horrors of the trenches were replaced by the daunting prospect of a life without purpose. In response, the Australian government unfurled a grand vision: the Soldier Settlement Scheme. It was a promise etched in gold, a chance to trade the mud of Flanders for the rich, red earth of home. Parcels of land, primarily in Western Australia, were offered to these veterans, not merely as a reward for their service, but as an opportunity to build a new nation, one wheat field at a time. They were to become the pioneers of a new agricultural frontier, taming the vast, untamed bush and transforming it into the breadbasket of the continent. The promise was intoxicating. For men who had faced death daily, the challenge of wresting a living from the soil seemed a noble and welcome struggle. They arrived with little more than their government grants, their wartime resilience, and a shared dream of prosperity and peace. They cleared the stubborn mallee scrub with their bare hands and rudimentary tools, the sun beating down relentlessly. Each felled tree, each plowed furrow, was a testament to their unwavering hope. They were building more than farms. They were building communities, futures for families they had longed for in the darkest hours of combat. In the district of Campion, the optimism was palpable. The soil was fertile, the rains had been kind, and the first wheat crops were beginning to sprout, their green shoots a vibrant symbol of life renewed. These men, bound by the shared trauma of war, were now united in a common purpose: to cultivate this land of promise. They believed the hardest battle was behind them. They could not have known that their next war would not be fought against men in uniform, but against an enemy far more numerous and utterly indifferent to their dreams. As the spring of 1932 bled into a hot, dry summer, the natural rhythms of the Australian continent began to stir. For millennia, the great emu populations had followed a predictable pattern: a seasonal pilgrimage from the inland regions towards the coast after their breeding season. It was a migration as old as the land itself, a timeless spectacle of nature. But this year, something was different. The settlers' new farms, with their cleared lands and abundant water sources, had inadvertently created an oasis in the vast expanse of the outback. For the migrating emus, these burgeoning wheat fields were not just an obstacle on their journey. They were an irresistible destination. It began as a trickle. A few birds sighted on the horizon, their tall, gangly forms shimmering in the heat haze. The farmers at first paid them little mind, seeing them as just another feature of the wild landscape they were taming. But the trickle soon became a stream, and the stream a flood. Day after day, more arrived. They came not in dozens or hundreds, but in thousands. An estimated 20,000 of the giant, flightless birds converged on the districts of Campion and Walgulan. The ground trembled under the weight of their thunderous, three-toed feet. They were a formidable sight, standing up to 2 meters tall, covered in shaggy brown feathers, and possessing a powerful, inquisitive nature. This was no gentle procession. It was an invasion. A vast, feathered horde, driven by instinct and hunger, descended upon the meticulously cultivated farmlands. The sky, once a symbol of limitless opportunity, now seemed to darken with the sheer number of birds appearing over every rise. The farmers watched, their initial curiosity souring into a knot of unease. The promise of their land was now being overshadowed by a living, breathing plague of an unimaginable scale. The delicate balance between man and nature was about to be shattered. The farmers' unease quickly curdled into outright panic. The emus, far from being passive visitors, were ravenous. They possessed an insatiable appetite for the tender wheat shoots that represented the settlers' entire investment of time, money, and hope. What they didn't eat, they destroyed. The sheer weight and clumsiness of the horde turned lush fields into barren, trampled mud. They crashed through fences as if they were made of matchsticks, the wire barriers proving to be a trivial inconvenience. This not only allowed the emus further access, but also opened the way for other pests, like rabbits, to pour in and compound the devastation. The settlers, men who had faced machine guns and artillery, found themselves utterly powerless. They tried everything their exhausted minds could conjure. They shouted and waved their arms, but the birds were unfazed. They banged pots and pans, creating a cacophony that the emus simply ignored. They rode their horses through the flocks, attempting to scatter them, but the birds would merely part like water around a stone, only to flow back together moments later. The dream of a peaceful, prosperous life was being trampled into the dust by thousands of powerful, bird-brained feet. Every morning brought a fresh wave of despair as farmers awoke to find more of their livelihood obliterated. The green fields, once a symbol of their future, were now a landscape of ruin. The financial toll was catastrophic, but the psychological impact was even worse. These veterans had survived a world war, believing they had earned their peace. Now they were facing defeat on their own land, not by a human enemy, but by a force of nature they could neither reason with nor intimidate. Their hard-won resilience began to crack, replaced by a desperate frustration. The fields of promise had become fields of despair, and the settlers realized with chilling certainty that this was a war they could not win on their own. Their enemy was relentless, immune to their efforts, and growing in number every single day. With their crops annihilated and their savings dwindling, the soldier settlers reached a breaking point. The individual battles against the feathered invaders had failed. It was clear that only a coordinated, powerful response could save them from total ruin. In dusty town halls and around makeshift campfires, the veterans gathered, their faces etched with worry and fatigue. They were soldiers, trained to follow a chain of command, and it was this instinct that now guided their actions. A plan was forged not with pitchforks and scarecrows, but with petitions and delegations. They decided to take their fight to a higher authority, the Australian government. A deputation of the former soldiers was dispatched to Perth to meet with the Minister for Defence, Sir George Pearce. Their plea was as desperate as it was unorthodox. They were not asking for subsidies or agricultural aid. They were asking for military intervention. They argued that as former servicemen who had fought for the country, they deserved its protection in this new crisis. They pointed out the irony of being defeated by a native bird after surviving the German army. More pragmatically, they highlighted that many of them possessed firearms, but lacked the ammunition and organization to make a real impact. They proposed a startling solution: deploy soldiers from the Australian Army, armed with machine guns, to declare war on the emus. It was a request that would have been laughable in any other context. But the government was in a difficult position. The settlers were a potent political symbol of the nation's post-war promise. To ignore their plight would be to admit the failure of the settlement scheme and to abandon the nation's heroes. Sir George Pearce, sympathetic to the veterans' cause and perhaps enticed by the public relations opportunity of a swift, decisive military operation, listened intently. After deliberation, the government made a fateful and unprecedented decision. They would grant the farmers' request. The army would be sent to war. In the chaotic aftermath of the Reign of Terror, France was a nation desperate for stability, governed by the precarious and often corrupt Directory. Power was a currency traded in shadowy salons and whispered political bargains. At the center of this web was Paul Barras, a dominant figure in the Directory, and a man who understood the levers of influence better than anyone. He was, for all intents and purposes, the minister of France's fate, and he was about to make a decision that would alter the course of European history. Barras was Josephine de Beauharnais' former lover and current protector, and he saw in her a tool of immense social value. He also saw in a young, ferociously ambitious Corsican general, Napoleon Bonaparte, a military instrument of unparalleled potential. The general was brilliant, but lacked the social polish and connections necessary to navigate the treacherous waters of Parisian high society. Josephine, on the other hand, was the epitome of aristocratic grace, a survivor who possessed the charm and network Bonaparte so desperately needed. Barras's intervention was not an act of romantic matchmaking. It was a cold, calculated political maneuver. By uniting the uncouth military genius with the socially adept widow, he believed he could create a formidable alliance that would serve his own interests. He could reward his promising general with a wife who would open doors for him, while simultaneously settling his own social and financial obligations to Josephine. The meeting he arranged was a strategic deployment. At a lavish party, he presented the awkward, intense Bonaparte to the elegant, self-possessed Josephine. The spark was immediate, though driven by different needs. Napoleon saw a gateway to the power he craved, embodied in a woman of intoxicating grace. Josephine saw a protector, a man of ferocious ambition who could offer her and her children security. In a world that had almost destroyed them, the minister Barras had made his decision. He had intervened, setting two celestial bodies on a collision course, unaware that the resulting explosion would consume him and forge an empire. Once Napoleon's passionate courtship began, Josephine initiated a grand mobilization of her own. Her campaign was not fought on the fields of Italy, but in the drawing rooms and salons of Paris. Her objective was not territorial conquest, but the complete capture of a secure future. This required the strategic deployment of every asset at her command, an arsenal of social graces and influential connections that functioned with the precision of a royal artillery. Her home on the Rue Chantereine became her command headquarters. From here, she marshaled her forces. Her artillery consisted of her reputation, her impeccable style, her network of friends and informants, and, most powerfully, her two children, Eugène and Hortense. They were her most effective cannons, endearing the young general to the idea of a ready-made family, a concept that appealed to his sense of dynasty. The mobilization was swift and total. Dressmakers were summoned to create a wardrobe befitting the future wife of a celebrated general. Invitations were dispatched for lavish dinners where Josephine could showcase her suitor to the Parisian elite, smoothing his rough edges and legitimizing his social ascent. She tutored him in the subtle arts of high society, teaching him which forks to use and whose hands to kiss. Each gesture, each party, each carefully chosen word was a calculated barrage intended to solidify her position. She was deploying not just her own charm, but the collective weight of the old aristocracy, which she represented. In a society still reeling from revolution, her grace and lineage were potent weapons. While Napoleon was preparing to command armies of men, Josephine was commanding an army of perceptions and influences. The Royal Australian Artillery in this context was the old royalist sentiment and aristocratic poise she embodied. A force she now deployed in service of a new, revolutionary power. It was a masterful campaign to ensure that when she finally surrendered to his proposal, it was on terms that cemented her as an indispensable partner in his meteoric rise. To win the battle for her future, Josephine possessed a formidable personal arsenal, far more subtle and effective than any conventional weaponry. This arsenal was not made of steel and gunpowder, but of charm, intelligence, and a carefully curated public image. Her two most powerful weapons, her Lewis guns, were her past and her children. Her past, as the Vicomtesse de Beauharnais and a survivor of the guillotine, gave her an air of tragic nobility and resilience that fascinated the new society. She was a living link to the elegance of the Ancien Régime, a quality that Napoleon, the ultimate social climber, found irresistible. Her second gun was her children, Eugène and Hortense. They were not merely dependents, they were strategic assets. Their aristocratic lineage and youthful charm humanized Napoleon and provided him with an instant, respectable family, a crucial element for a man obsessed with founding a dynasty. These two weapons gave her immense firepower in the social battlefield of Paris. Supporting this heavy artillery were her 10,000 rounds of ammunition, the seemingly infinite supply of social graces she could deploy at will. This included her impeccable taste in fashion and interior design, which set the standard for an entire era and turned her into a cultural icon. It was her mastery of conversation, her ability to disarm political rivals, and charm foreign dignitaries with a single smile. It was the thousands of handwritten notes, the careful management of guest lists, the cultivation of loyalty among her staff, and the strategic circulation of gossip. Every dress she wore, every piece of furniture she commissioned, every party she hosted was a carefully aimed shot in her campaign for influence and security. She understood that in this new France, power was won not just on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion. Her arsenal was designed for this new kind of warfare, and she wielded it with the skill of a veteran general, ensuring her place at the very center of power. The civil marriage ceremony on March 9, 1796, was a rushed, unglamorous affair. Just 2 days later, Napoleon departed to take command of the French army in Italy, initiating the first major engagement of their marriage. This was not a battle fought with cannons, but with ink and paper. A tumultuous conflict of passion, neglect, and misunderstanding, waged across hundreds of miles. It was their own Battle of Campion, a first test of their union that proved far more complex and emotionally fraught than either had anticipated. From the battlefields of Italy, Napoleon, consumed by a love that was as obsessive as his military ambition, unleashed a torrent of letters. They were a barrage of fiery passion, demanding prose, and desperate pleas for her to join him. "I awake full of you," he wrote. "Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses." He begged for replies, for her affection, for her presence, feeling the sting of every day of her silence as a physical blow. Back in Paris, Josephine's response was a strategic retreat. She was enjoying her new status as the wife of a conquering hero, basking in the glow of his victories without having to endure the hardships of a military camp. She indulged in the vibrant social life of the capital, attending parties, acquiring expensive things, and perhaps entertaining other admirers. To her, Napoleon's letters were overwrought, his demands suffocating. She read them, often with amusement to her friends, and rarely replied with the fervor he craved. This first engagement revealed the fundamental disconnect between them. He saw her as the ultimate prize, the goddess for whom he conquered. She saw him as a provider of security and status, an intense and brilliant man whose obsessions were best managed from a safe distance. The battle was a tactical failure for Napoleon. His emotional siege failed to capture his wife's immediate devotion. For Josephine, it was a temporary victory, preserving her independence. But this early conflict set the pattern for their entire relationship. A turbulent cycle of his desperate pursuit and her elusive retreat, a passionate, painful, and legendary battle of two powerful hearts. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery arrived in Western Australia with a clear, if unusual, mandate to wage war on emus. He was a seasoned soldier, a veteran of the Great War, and he brought with him 2 Lewis automatic machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The settlers, whose wheat crops were being devastated by an estimated 20,000 migrating emus, saw him as a savior. The initial assessment was one of overconfidence. How could a flightless bird, no matter how large, stand against modern military hardware? The reality, however, proved to be a baffling and deeply frustrating lesson in unconventional warfare. The emus, it turned out, were tactical geniuses of a sort. They did not mass together in dense, vulnerable formations as expected. Instead, they moved with a loose, unpredictable discipline. When the soldiers opened fire, the flocks would not panic in a single direction. They would instantly split into numerous small groups, each running erratically, making it impossible for the gunners to draw a bead on any single target for more than a second. The birds possessed incredible speed, reaching up to 50 kilometers per hour, and a thick coat of feathers that seemed to almost shrug off bullets, unless hit in a vital area. The soldiers quickly discovered their enemy was far from the docile pest they had imagined. Each flock appeared to have a leader, a large black-plumed bird that would keep watch while the others fed. At the first sign of danger, this sentinel would give a warning cry, and the entire group would scatter, long before the soldiers were even in effective range. The military's tactics, designed for human conflict, were utterly useless. They were fighting ghosts in the scrubland, an enemy that refused to engage on their terms. The Lewis guns, so devastating in the trenches of France, were proving clumsy and inefficient against these fleet-footed, feathered insurgents. The term guerrilla tactics began to be whispered among the bewildered troops, a recognition that they were not engaged in a simple cull, but a genuine, albeit bizarre, conflict against a foe that held all the advantages of speed, terrain knowledge, and sheer unpredictability. The first major engagement of the war took place near the settlement of Campion on the 2nd of November, 1932. Major Meredith and his men had spotted a flock of approximately 50 emus, and with the help of local settlers, attempted to herd them into an effective killing zone. The attempt was a categorical failure. The birds were too fast and too clever, easily outmaneuvering their pursuers and scattering into the bush. It was a disheartening start, but Meredith was determined. 2 days later, a more promising opportunity presented itself. Scouts reported a massive concentration of over 1,000 emus gathered near a local dam. This was the moment the soldiers had been waiting for. A chance to use the devastating firepower of the Lewis guns on a concentrated target. An ambush was carefully prepared. The gunners concealed themselves, sighted their weapons, and waited. As the unsuspecting birds moved towards the water, the order was given to open fire. The sudden roar of the machine guns echoed across the plains, but the expected carnage did not materialize. The first volley brought down perhaps a dozen birds. In an instant, the remaining 1,000 erupted into a chaotic, multi-directional stampede. The gunners frantically tried to track the zigzagging targets, spraying bullets across the landscape with little effect. The element of surprise was lost, and the engagement descended into a farce. One of the Lewis guns jammed after firing only a few rounds, rendering it useless. The remaining gunner continued to fire, but the emus were simply too swift, and their movements too erratic. The soldiers watched in disbelief as the vast flock melted away into the landscape, leaving behind a handful of their dead. The expenditure of ammunition was immense, the results pitiful. By Meredith's own report, 2,500 rounds had been fired for a kill count in the low double digits. The futility of the operation was starkly clear. On November 8th, after less than a week in the field, the first campaign was called off. The soldiers packed up their guns and retreated, not from a superior military force, but from an enemy they could not hit. The first battle in the Great Emu War had been an unmitigated victory for the emus. News of the military's retreat traveled far faster than the emus themselves. What began as a regional pest control issue quickly escalated into a national and then international source of amusement and ridicule. The press had a field day with the story. Newspapers in Perth, Sydney, and even London seized upon the absurd narrative of a modern army being outwitted by large, flightless birds. Headlines mockingly declared victory for the emu army and lampooned the government's efforts. The story was simply too perfect. The pompous military, armed with machine guns, forced into a humiliating withdrawal by an enemy armed with nothing but feathers and an instinct for self-preservation. Conservationists, who had opposed the cull from the beginning, added their voices to the chorus of mockery. One prominent ornithologist, Dr. Dominic Serventi, famously commented on the campaign's failure, noting, "The machine gunners' dreams of point-blank fire into serried masses of emus were soon dissipated, The Emu Command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics, and its unwieldy army soon split up into innumerable small units that made use of the military equipment uneconomic. This framing of the conflict, with an Emu Command and guerrilla tactics, cemented the event's place in comedic history. The political fallout was significant for the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. In the Australian House of Representatives, he was subjected to pointed and sarcastic questioning about the cost of the war and the casualties sustained by the Emu forces. The government, already struggling with the effects of the Great Depression, now looked incompetent and foolish. The soldiers involved, veterans of real wars, became the butt of jokes across the country. The farmers of Western Australia, whose livelihoods were genuinely at stake, found their desperate pleas for help transformed into a laughingstock. The power of the media's gaze had turned a serious agricultural crisis into a global punchline, and the immense public pressure and humiliation were key factors in the military's decision to cease operations. The war for now was over, lost not on the battlefield, but on the front pages of the nation's newspapers. While the cities laughed, the farmers of Western Australia were not amused. The emus, emboldened by the military's retreat, continued their relentless assault on the wheat fields. The problem had not gone away. In fact, the hot, dry weather was driving even more birds onto the cultivated lands. The farmers renewed their pleas for assistance, lobbying the government with a desperate intensity. Despite the public ridicule, the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, was swayed. He argued fiercely in Parliament that the farmers deserved protection and that the prestige of the state was on the line. On the 12th of November, just days after the first withdrawal, he approved a second expedition. Major Meredith was once again tasked with leading the charge. This time, however, he returned to the field with a more sober understanding of his unconventional enemy. The overconfidence was gone, replaced by a grim determination to salvage some measure of success and military pride. The second offensive began on November 13th. The tactics were different. Meredith's force was more mobile, and they abandoned the strategy of large-scale ambushes that had previously failed so spectacularly. Instead, they focused on smaller, more targeted engagements, often operating from the back of moving trucks. This new approach yielded better results. While still incredibly difficult, the kill rate began to climb. Over the following month, Meredith's reports claimed more consistent success. He reported 40 EMUs killed in one engagement and nearly 100 over a 2-day period. By the time the second operation concluded in mid-December, the official figures claimed 986 emus killed with 9,860 rounds of ammunition. This equated to a ratio of exactly 10 bullets per confirmed kill, a vast improvement on the first attempt, but still a testament to the emus' resilience. Meredith also noted in his report that a further 2,500 birds, wounded by the gunfire, had likely died later from their injuries. While the second offensive was statistically a success, it was a hard-won and grueling campaign that did little to silence the public mockery. The army had proven it could, eventually, kill emus with machine guns, but the cost in ammunition, time, and reputation was immense. In the chaotic, fast-moving world of Directory-era Paris, survival was a matter of speed and firepower. For Josephine de Beauharnais, recently freed from the shadow of the guillotine, her weapon was not made of steel, but of irresistible charm. And her transport was not a truck, but a social network that could traverse the city's treacherous political landscape at a moment's notice. She was, in effect, a mobile unit of immense influence, and her salon on the Rue Chantereine was the firing position from which she launched her campaigns. This was not a static defense, it was a rapid deployment force. Josephine understood that in this new France, power was fluid. It belonged to whoever could assemble the right people in the right room at the right time. Her salon became that room. With tactical precision, she gathered an eclectic mix of rehabilitated aristocrats, ambitious generals, opportunistic politicians, and wealthy financiers. Each guest was ammunition. Each conversation was a targeted volley. Her charm acted like a machine gun, effortlessly cutting down social rivals and winning over potential adversaries with a disarming smile or a perfectly timed compliment. She moved through the factions of Paris with the adaptability of an all-terrain vehicle, forging alliances with Barras and the directors, while simultaneously cultivating relationships with military men on the rise, most notably the awkward but brilliant Napoleon Bonaparte. Her past, which could have been a liability, was instead deployed as a tool, the tragic widow of the revolution, a survivor who commanded both pity and respect. She gathered intelligence, brokered deals, and built a reputation not just as a hostess, but as an essential node in the city's power grid. While men fought with swords and speeches, Josephine fought with invitations and influence, a one-woman rapid response unit, securing her future one dinner party at a time. The news struck Josephine like a physical blow. Napoleon had landed at Fréjus. He was back from Egypt, unexpectedly, and speeding towards Paris. With this news came a tidal wave of terror. She knew, with sickening certainty, that his brothers, Joseph and Lucien, would have already dispatched riders to intercept him, their saddlebags filled with poisonous, exaggerated tales of her infidelity. Her only hope was to reach him first, to see the look in his eyes, to use her presence to nullify their venom before it could fully take root. What followed was a literal embodiment of chaos on wheels. Commandeering a carriage, she began a frantic, desperate chase south. It was a race against rumor, an ill-fated pursuit born of panic. The roads of late 18th century France were rutted and treacherous, the journey a jarring, bone-shaking ordeal. Every stop to change horses was an agony of wasted minutes. She pushed her driver, her servants, and herself to the brink, her mind a whirlwind of potential scenarios, each more dreadful than the last. Would he believe them? Would he cast her aside? The entire future she had so carefully constructed was balanced on the axle of this speeding carriage. But fate, or perhaps just poor cartography, conspired against her. In her haste, she chose the wrong route. While she thundered down the road through Burgundy, Napoleon, taking a faster path, was already miles ahead, his own carriage eating up the distance to Paris. The chase was doomed from the start. She was pursuing a ghost. The crushing realization of her failure came when she finally arrived back at their house on the Rue de la Victoire, exhausted and defeated, only to find it dark and silent. He had already arrived. He had heard the stories from his family, and he had locked her out. The chase was over, and through the cold, unyielding wood of the door, she could feel the icy chill of his fury. Once Napoleon forgave her, their reunion was passionate, and the coup of 18 Brumaire made them the most powerful couple in France. But as first consul and then emperor, Napoleon's ambition demanded one thing Josephine could not provide: an heir. This single, devastating failure ignited a silent, brutal war of attrition, fought not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the corridors and bedchambers of the Tuileries Palace. The enemy was an alliance of biology and the Bonaparte clan. The mounting casualties were Josephine's own hopes, her emotional stability, and her sense of security. Each month that passed without a pregnancy was another victory for her enemies. Another piece of her position eroded away. Her sisters-in-law, Caroline and Pauline, were relentless combatants, their whispers and accusations a constant barrage of psychological warfare. They pointed to her age, her past, and her inability to conceive as proof of her unsuitability. They promoted younger, more fertile candidates for Napoleon's bed, turning the court into a landscape of political landmines. Josephine's body became a battlefield. She subjected herself to an endless campaign of humiliating and often bizarre fertility treatments prescribed by the leading physicians of the day. She drank mineral waters, endured strange diets, and suffered through painful procedures, all in a desperate attempt to achieve the one victory that would secure her throne. The emotional toll was immense. The war wore her down, planting seeds of anxiety and fear that haunted her waking moments. Every state dinner, every public appearance was a performance, a projection of serene confidence, while inside she was weathering a relentless siege. This was not a war of grand, decisive battles, but of slow, grinding losses. The casualties were moments of joy stolen by anxiety, private tears shed after a public triumph, and the gradual, painful realization that this was a war she was destined to lose. In analyzing Josephine's long tenure as empress, the historian Evelyn Meredith famously wrote, "Against the combined political machinery of the Bonaparte dynasty, she proved for a time to be as socially invincible as Zulus against a technologically superior foe." This assessment, though anachronistic, perfectly captures the nature of Josephine's struggle and her remarkable resilience. She was, by all accounts, outgunned. The Bonaparte clan possessed the ultimate weapon, the claim of blood. They were family. And in the dynastic game Napoleon was playing, blood was paramount. They wielded their connection to him like a club, constantly seeking to bludgeon Josephine from her position of power. Yet, for nearly a decade, she held them off. Her defense was not passive. It was a masterful strategy of soft power and public perception. Josephine understood that her greatest shield was the love of two separate entities, her husband and the French people. She cultivated her image as the benevolent, graceful, and fashionable heart of the empire. She was Notre Dame de Victoire, Our Lady of Victories, a symbol of the nation's elegance and glory. To attack her was to attack a popular national icon. She outmaneuvered her rivals with superior tactics on the courtly battlefield. At the coronation in 1804, when Napoleon's sisters were ordered to carry her train, they intentionally let it fall. Without missing a beat, Josephine simply stopped, forcing them to stoop and correct their mistake in front of the entire assembly. A subtle but decisive public humiliation. She was a master of turning her perceived weaknesses into strengths. Her inability to produce an heir was a vulnerability, but her children from her first marriage, Eugène and Hortense, were fiercely loyal and deeply loved by Napoleon, forming a defensive bulwark around her. For years, she repelled every assault, parried every thrust, and held her ground with a tenacity that baffled her enemies. proving that in the war for the crown, the power of love and popular adoration could make one seem, for a time, truly invincible. The ink on the annulment was barely dry when Napoleon's quest for a new bride and a new dynasty reached its conclusion. In 1810, the court of France welcomed its new empress, Marie-Louise, the young Archduchess of Austria, a Habsburg princess chosen to legitimize Napoleon's rule, and most importantly, to provide him with an heir. For Josephine, now relegated to her estate at Malmaison, the news was a public confirmation of her deepest failure. She maintained a brave face, even offering to coach the young Austrian in the complex etiquette of the French court, a gesture of supreme grace under immense personal pain. Yet, behind closed doors, she wept. The man she still loved was now married to another, a political pawn in a game she had once mastered. The true turning point came a year later, in March 1811, with the birth of Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, the long-awaited son, titled from birth the King of Rome. All of Paris celebrated. Cannons boomed to announce the arrival of the imperial heir. For Josephine, the sound was both a joy and a torment. She had genuinely wanted Napoleon to have a son, to secure his legacy, but the reality of it solidified her own displacement. Napoleon, however, could not sever his bond with her completely. He wrote to her immediately after the birth, his letter filled with a tenderness reserved only for her, describing his son as having her eyes. He allowed her to see the infant, a clandestine and emotionally fraught meeting that underscored the bizarre nature of their new relationship. She was the beloved former empress, a cherished confidant living in a gilded cage, forever watching the imperial life she had been forced to leave behind. She remained empress in title, but a shadow. Empress in truth, her influence felt in Napoleon's continued affection and generous financial support, yet powerless to reclaim her central role in his life or his empire. Freed from the rigid constraints of the imperial court, Josephine poured her energy and Napoleon's generous allowance into transforming her Château de Malmaison into a personal paradise. It was both a refuge and a statement, a world of her own making. While her political power had vanished, her influence as a tastemaker and patroness reached its zenith. Malmaison became a living museum of her passions. Her most famous legacy was the garden, which she curated with scientific precision and artistic flair. She dispatched botanists across the globe, amassing a collection of exotic plants never before seen in Europe. She cultivated over 250 varieties of roses, commissioning the celebrated artist Pierre-Joseph Redoute to immortalize them in his magnificent botanical illustrations, creating a priceless record of her horticultural achievements. The grounds were not just home to flora. Josephine established a menagerie of rare and exotic animals, including kangaroos, emus, black swans, and orangutans, which roamed in specially constructed enclosures. This collection was not merely for amusement, it was a subject of serious scientific study, cementing her reputation as a significant patron of the natural sciences. Inside the chateau, her famous flair for interior design continued to evolve, setting trends that rippled across the continent. She hosted artists, writers, and scientists, maintaining a court of culture that rivaled the political court in Paris. Yet, for all its beauty and activity, Malmaison was a gilded cage. Every letter from Napoleon, every piece of news from the capital, was a reminder of the life from which she was exiled. Her children, Eugène and Hortense were her constant solace, their own prominent positions in Napoleon's empire, providing a continued link to power. But Josephine was acutely aware that her status, her wealth, and her security were entirely dependent on the continued success of the man who had set her aside for dynastic ambition. The world that had sustained Josephine's luxurious retirement began to crumble with Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. The slow, agonizing collapse of the Grande Armée marked the beginning of the end for the First French Empire. As Napoleon fought a desperate, losing battle against the combined forces of the Sixth Coalition, Josephine watched from Malmaison with mounting terror. Her fate was inextricably tied to his. Should he fall, her titles, her properties, and her very safety would be in jeopardy. Despite the personal pain he had caused her, her loyalty to him never wavered. She wrote frantic letters to her children, seeking news from the front, her correspondence filled with anxiety for the emperor's well-being. When Paris fell to the Allied armies in March 1814, a wave of panic swept through the Bonapartist establishment. Many fled, but Josephine remained. It was in this moment of crisis that her enduring grace and diplomatic skill shone brightest. The victorious monarchs, far from treating her as the wife of their vanquished enemy, viewed her with respect and curiosity. Chief among them was Tsar Alexander I of Russia, who had long been an admirer. He personally ensured her protection and made it a point to visit her at Malmaison. He was utterly charmed, spending hours walking with her through her famous gardens, discussing art, botany, and politics. Other Allied leaders followed suit. In a remarkable turn of events, the deposed Empress's home became a neutral ground, a salon where the conquerors of France paid homage to her. She navigated these treacherous waters with the same poise she had displayed at the height of her power, securing not only her own position, but also advocating for the future of her children. While Napoleon faced exile on the island of Elba, Josephine, the wife he had divorced, held court for his enemies, a final poignant testament to her unique and unconquerable charm. In the spring of 1814, amidst the political turmoil of Napoleon's first abdication, Josephine's personal reign at Malmaison was in full bloom. On a cool May afternoon, she took a long walk through her gardens with Tsar Alexander, wearing a light, fashionable gown, ill-suited for the damp air. A few days later, she developed a cough that quickly worsened. The diagnosis was swift and severe, acute pneumonia. Her health declined rapidly, and on May 29, 1814, at the age of 50, the first Empress of the French was dead. Her final words, whispered in delirium, were a testament to the life that had defined her. Bonaparte, Elba, the King of Rome. The news of her death prompted a genuine outpouring of grief. Over 20,000 people, from local villagers to foreign dignitaries, lined the streets to pay their respects as her funeral procession made its way to the nearby church in Rueil. Her passing marked the end of an era. But her legacy was only just beginning. Josephine was far more than Napoleon's great love. She was a cultural force who defined the empire style in fashion and interior design. Her patronage of the arts gave rise to masterpieces, and her passion for botany, particularly her collection of roses at Malmaison, had a lasting impact on horticulture. Yet, her most profound legacy was dynastic, a supreme irony for the woman divorced for her inability to produce an heir for Napoleon. Through her children, Eugène and Hortense, Her bloodline flowed into the royal houses of Europe. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would become kings, queens, princes, and princesses of Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The Creole woman from Martinique, whose fortune teller once predicted she would be more than a queen, had, through her descendants, populated the very thrones Napoleon had fought so desperately to secure for his own dynasty. Her love story with Napoleon was legendary, but her ultimate legacy was a crown of her own making, worn by generations to come.